Me from the future with some important information. If you're intimidated by the timestamp on this video, have courage. There's a shorter version which can be accessed by either skipping to the next video in the Vidrio Teithio playlist or via the link in the description. If you have the time, I highly recommend sticking around for this longer recording, as it includes everything from the short one plus an additional 15 minutes of footage. So if you watch this one, there's no need to watch the short one as well. You can skip it when it comes on next if you're watching through the Vidrio Teithio playlist. Or if you're not that interested in seeing underground scenery and learning fun facts about the marble halls of Oregon, you can go ahead and skip to the next video in the playlist now, / use that link in the description to access the short version. But with every sentence I add, this introduction gets longer and longer, making the video longer and longer, meaning less and less of you will have time to watch the whole thing, and we'll be skipping to the short version, which, like I said, I don't think is quite as good. So, without further ado, let me present...
One thing that is growing a little bit down in here, though, right in here, popcorn. Popcorn.
Ave everyone! As you can see from the title card, we're in Oregon now, en route to the Oregon Caves National Monument. Also, welcome to Series 7 of Vidrio Teithio, the first series under the new way of doing things. I'm going to try and make it more about the places we visit and less about me personally, so that hopefully this can be transformed into more of a travel show than a vlog that features travel. I'm going to be trying out several techniques to accomplish that end, and if you have any suggestions at any time, be sure to leave them in the comments. Feedback is always appreciated, both positive and negative, as long as it is constructive. Anyhow, let's get to the monument. The signs say no trailer travel recommended on this road out to the park, but we're gonna try it anyway. The road was very narrow and windy, also steep at parts, but hardly the most treacherous path we've been on in the RV. They have plenty of turnouts along the way, but if a large vehicle was coming downhill at the same time a large vehicle was coming uphill and they met at a spot without turnouts, it could be tricky to pass each other. But other than that, it was totally fine for our 31-foot Pampero. Going downhill might be a different story, but we've arrived at the visitor center without incident.
Ranger who consistently through the cave refers to her tail as bear bait. I don't do that. The cave was first discovered, as far as we know, in 1874 by a hunter who was up here in this mountain. His hunting dog actually caught the scent of a bear, probably sleeping inside the entrance. Chased him inside, and then the guy's name was Elijah Davidson. Made a national monument in 1909 by President William Howard Taft. These mountains around us here, this whole region, is very, very complicated. The geology of the rocks up in these mountains is very complex. The ecology is also very complicated up in these mountains. We have some of the highest biodiversity up here anywhere in the United States, even in the world, at least as far as temperate forests go. A lot of different species call the cave home. They live inside of it. Some just come down into it from the outside for a little while. Of the ones that live inside, actually have a few that live outside too. They're what we call endemic, meaning they live nowhere else in the entire world. This cave actually has more endemic species than any other cave in the United States. Another really interesting thing actually about this cave is the rock from which it's formed. It's a marble cave. Now that's kind of unusual. Only about 5% of the caves in the world are made from marble. You may have noticed there's a stream that flows right out of the entrance. That stream actually does form inside the mountain. As it flows down the mountain from us, is known as Cave Creek. But inside the cave, we actually call it something else. We call it the River Styx. So, if everyone is ready, we'll follow the River Styx on into the underworld of Oregon Caves. So, welcome to the cave, everybody. Speaking of Elijah Davidson earlier, this is actually where he would have come crawling in. We're basically standing inside a huge block of marble right now that's embedded inside of this mountain. Is everyone somewhat familiar with the idea of plate tectonics? There's a lot of heat and pressure down there which changed the limestone into marble. It's the same mineral, it's still calcite, just a different form, it's a different rock now. One thing real quick before we move on, I want to point out our first cave formation. This bumpy stuff up on the ceiling here. It has kind of a funny name. We call it cave popcorn. Popcorn. This popcorn here actually grows a little differently than most things in the cave. It forms by evaporation. Water condensing to the walls and then evaporating away, leaving behind minerals, calcite. So this popcorn actually really only grows near cave entrances, like right here, where you have a lot of air flowing, where you have changing temperatures. And that's exactly why you actually don't really have larger cave formations growing in here. They can't grow when you have too much air flowing and the temperature is not very constant. So this is where we start to see some of the first larger formations in the cave. Can anyone tell me what we call these big pointy things here up on the ceiling?
Stalactites.
Yeah, absolutely right, stalactites. There's also a lot of these really skinny, kind of straight ones up here, like right in there especially. And we call those something else. They're basically baby stalactites, stalactites in the making, and we call them soda straws. They are hollow, just like a straw. You can see drops of water hanging from the ends of quite a few of them. Water moves down through the center of that straw and hangs off the end. As it hangs there, it leaves behind a little ring of calcite. Those rings build up, drop by drop. The straws get longer and longer until that hole plugs up in the middle. Water moves on the outside and makes them thicker and wider and longer. And that's how we get stalactites. These big fins hanging off the walls, we call these cave draperies. Look a lot like curtains or drapes decorating the walls of the cave. Here we actually have some smaller roots hanging down off the ceiling, growing down through cracks in the rock. But what I wanted to actually show you in this passageway is the rock up above your heads. This is the marble that makes up this cave. Kind of an unusual marble, actually. A lot of marble you see is very white or cream colored. This marble has a lot of these bluish black bands of color running through it. No, those black bands or stripes are actually the mineral graphite, pure carbon. All that carbon was left behind by algae, microbes, other living things on that ancient limestone reef. Got layered in and then heated and compressed to form graphite.
What are the lines?
Ah. So these lines up here, these are basically little cracks, little stress fractures in the marble that the water has filled in with calcite. And if water were to flow through this passageway again, it would actually dissolve the marble from in between those cracks and just leave those little lines of calcite behind. And you would get something called boxwork. It's a very rare cave formation, actually. It would basically look like a big honeycomb of boxes up here in the ceiling. There's a cave in South Dakota, Winged Cave National Park, world famous for their boxwork. Most caves have a fairly constant annual temperature down in them, and that temperature is usually right around the average temperature of the region they're in. So whatever the average annual temperature is up on the surface, that's pretty much going to be the temperature that's down in the cave. Be very careful climbing the steps here. This staircase is a little bit better than the wooden ladders they used to have back in the old days, but it's still kind of steep. Watch your heads on the way up. There's a mesh rock here on the right. Another one up at the top of the steps, also on the right. I call these two the astronomer's stones because if you hit your head on them, you'll probably be seeing stars. Quite a bit warmer up here, you probably noticed. Lots of air moving, and that's coming from right there. This is a natural entrance to the cave. That's daylight coming down right there. It's basically a sinkhole, a place where the cave wall collapsed at some point in the past. Real quick before we move on, quick note about all this popcorn up here. Really cool thing about some of this popcorn is that it's growing on cave draperies. Actually down in the room we just came from as well a little bit. Popcorn growing on older cave formations. These things can't grow near an entrance like this. I talked a bit about that at the beginning. Too much airflow, too much changing temperatures. So these draperies actually grew before that entrance existed.
Before that opened, sure.
Yeah. When that opened up and let air down here, the draperies stopped growing. Popcorn grew up on top. Another example of cave environment changing.
It looks like there's honey.
Would it start making drapery air? It would be flowing, because you still need water to grow new formations like that. So even if you stop the airflow, you might not still have the water flow that you would need. This formation right back here, we call this Niagara Falls. Our very own Niagara Falls here in Oregon in stone rather than water, although it was formed by water. Some interesting history back in this part of the cave, actually. In the whole cave, really, but especially right here. Like I said, at the beginning, the cave was first discovered in 1874. For about the first 10 years, the passage right behind me here was all blocked up. One of the earliest cave guides realized that there were more passages down below, tunneled through right here to open it up and explore deeper inside. But before that, tour groups would stop right here, turn around, go back out the way we just came. In those days, it was a very difficult journey to come see the caves. Even more difficult than driving up that crazy road. Back then, there was no road. It meant several days on horseback through the mountains to get here. Most folks in those days had never seen a cave. This was like an alien world to them. That lack of understanding, and also the long journey to get here, which is why in this part of the cave, especially, we see so much human damage to the cave. Formations snapped off, taken home as souvenirs, snap off a stalactite, go back out the way they just came. Now, most of those folks had no idea what they were doing. They honestly thought that these would grow right back. They thought they looked like icicles. They probably grew as fast as icicles do. Of course, nowadays we know a little bit better. Average rate of growth in this particular cave, about an inch every 1,000 years.
Wow.
In addition to breaking off souvenirs, a lot of folks also decided to record their journey
Oh,
here to the cave.
that's cool.
Oh, I didn't see that.
There's signatures with dates on a lot of formations inside this cave, but on this one especially. This has by far the most signatures on it. Most of this writing is very, very old. The dark writing, 1897 right there, 1885 right here. Written in pencil. If you see something scratched in the rock, unfortunately that is much more recent. And of course today carries a hefty fine with it, but back then there was no penalty for doing any of this. All this damage was a big reason why people pushed to make this a monument. Kind of interesting history associated with this writing, though. I mean, yes, it was graffiti, but at this point it's old enough to be kind of historically interesting. In 1917, funny story, the Forest Service came in here and tried to erase all of this writing. Found out they couldn't. It will not come off the rock.
Because it's underneath, right?
Exactly. It's been covered over. Water flowing down has covered it up with a layer of calcite. Laminated it almost into the rock now forever and ever. It's getting hard to read in some places. Other places it is still very legible. You can see right through the calcite. This list of names, for instance, in 1885, geology class from the University of Oregon. Signed at the top by their instructor, Professor Thomas Condon, rather famous geologist. Got a building named after him at the University of Oregon. The early cave guy who tunneled through here in the 1880s, his initials are right over here, WCB, Walter Birch. Right above it he wrote, "Please do not destroy." Or destroy, rather. Actually, destroy is very misspelled. I do kind of like the sentiment, even though he decided to write it right on the rock, and then blasted his way through part of the cave. Basically, at one time, this was an underground waterfall. A stream of water pouring down through this hole up above our heads here, from somewhere up in the surface, flowing down through the rock and then breaking through right here. Probably following a fracture in the rock on down, carving out this shaft we're about to go down here. Down at the bottom of the steps, we're actually going to see one of the oldest formations in the entire cave. We've seen some small ones already. This one's much bigger. It's what happens when a stalactite and a stalagmite meet and join together. When that happens, does anybody know what we call them? Very good. We call them a column. Everybody down the steps back there.
They're covered.
Yeah. So that column right back there, we call that the grand column, for obvious reasons. That column right there, really good preview of our next room, one of my favorites in the cave. But to get to it, we do have to go through some narrow passages. So this room right here, one of my favorites in the cave, mostly because of all the great formations we've got. Some of the best stalactites and stalagmites in the cave are growing up here in this room. Also some of the longest soda straws in the cave, right up in here. We call this room Miller's Chapel, by the way. Got that name in 1937 when the first wedding was held down here. Rather famous wedding known as the Caveman Wedding. Entire wedding party dressed up as cave people.
Oh,
wearing
funny.
skins and furs. Picture of them all lined up right up in here. This little guy right over here I like to point out before moving on. He's not very impressive, but I think if you use your imagination, you can maybe see something peering at us from the wall of the cave. Maybe a ghostly face.
Scream.
Maybe a famous painting called The Scream. Yes. And I like to point him out before moving on because the next room of the cave is actually known as the Ghost Room. So this is the Ghost Room, the largest room in the entire cave. And I won't keep you waiting. I'll bring up some lights for you all. The room probably got its name for a number of reasons, but the main one I think is all the pearly white ghosts that we have peering at us from different parts of this room. Lots of very nice white formations growing down in here. formations we see in the cave, this kind of yellowish brown or tan color, that's largely from impurities. These white formations are very, very pure calcite. Most of the impurities have been filtered out of the water flowing down into this part of the cave. We saw back at Niagara Falls with those signatures that calcite is actually clear. You can see right through it. These white formations look this way because of air bubbles that are trapped inside the formations. It's actually a lot like ice. If you were to squeeze all the air out of ice, it actually turns blue, like glacial ice. These formations are calcite, just like the marble, just formed in a very different way. There's some more really nice white formations up the steps from us here, so have a look at some of those as we climb on up. Make a quick stop and have a look at a very different sort of calcium deposit, one that we haven't seen up to this point. This is the different sort of calcium deposit that I mentioned right here. Of course, bones and teeth, another calcium-based mineral, just like the calcite that forms the cave. These bones right here are the remains of a baby black bear. Came down into the cave about 3,000 years ago and didn't make it back out again. Caves, usually very good places to find fossils and the remains of living things. Things get preserved very well down here. We have constant temperatures in the cave, fairly constant humidity as well. Things are protected from the elements, rain and wind, up on the surface. So when things die down in caves, like I said, they usually get preserved very, very well. And we found some pretty interesting remains in this cave, actually. One of the most interesting, probably the skeleton of an Ice Age jaguar. Wow. Dated at a little over 38,000 years old. It's the farthest north and farthest west jaguar remains have ever been found in North America. Also one of the world's best collections of salamander fossils. Their bones are very small and delicate, usually don't get preserved very well. There's actually some really good examples from this cave. Usually all they find is vertebrae.
It's 12:39. We just got out of the cave. Very interesting tour. Anyway, now we're just hiking back to the visitor center. The long way around, over the mountain, instead of just going straight 200 feet back to the visitor center to see what we can see on the nature trail. I left my hat in the car because it's been into caves in the last few years. Carlsbad Caverns, Mammoth Cave, Kartchner Caverns, etc. Which you can read about on the old blog. I'll put a link in the description. But anyway, there's a fungus that's been going around. It causes white nose syndrome. It basically grows over the faces of bats in caves and suffocates them to death. So you're not really supposed to bring stuff that's been in other caves that have been contaminated, like Mammoth Cave, into caves that haven't been. If you are, they need to be washed thoroughly. So we decided it'd be best to leave the hat in the car, but now I don't have it, and it's very warm up here. They have informative plaques along the path, such as this one, to explain what seasons are for visitors from California. And here's the view. It'll probably be better from up there.
Oh, wow. It's so pretty. It's orange.
And here is the exit for that sinkhole you saw earlier. 14:06 now. We just finished going through the visitor center and now we're going to grab some sustenance at the chateau. A historic wooden structure built in the late 1800s, I believe. I'm not 100% sure, I could be wrong on that.
The coffee shop, you're going to go down that big set of stairs over there and then you'll go to the right. Almost done.
Bye-bye, ladies.
Hey, Doc. What?
No, it's just as bad.
Correction, according to the menu, it was built during the Great Depression. I got the Reuben with fries for $10.50, and my mom got the tuna melt with a pasta salad for $9.50. So what'd you think of the tuna melt?
It was very good. A little bit sweet, but very good. Bread was good. Lots of cheese. Pasta salad was very good.
It had celery in it, which is something I don't normally like in tuna salads, but it was very subtle, at least the bite that I had of it, and was pretty good, I think. My Reuben was also excellent. It wasn't the corniest corned beef that I've had, but it was very good. Solid, well cooked, but tender and easy to chew. Also a lot of cheese, which was awesome. The fries are very salty. It's very good to me. Anyhow, we just ordered some shakes. They're $6.85 a piece. I got toasted marshmallow, and she got a fresh cookie because they were out of cookie dough.
Toasted marshmallow,
Thank you.
cookie. Thank you. You're very welcome. There you are, folks. Enjoy, okay?
Thank you.
So the total came out to $33.65, which is definitely on the expensive side, but I think it's pretty reasonable for a national park restaurant of this quality.
I think it's a little bit high, but these milkshakes are pretty big, so I guess it's reasonable. I think the milkshakes are a little high, but they're good
And historical.
and historic.
Also, there's some weird quality of them that I don't know if it's just me, but if you drink the shakes, get a fry, get ketchup on it, and eat it, for a second it tastes just like alcohol. I think it's something in the ketchup. Further research seemed to suggest that actually only the toasted marshmallow shake, when mixed with ketchup, produces the strange effect. But with so many flavors, much more research is needed before I can state that definitively. Anyway, we're on our way back to the car now. It is 15:18. It's 21:03 now. We just watched some YouTube stuff after getting to the Medford Walmart. There's 3 Walmarts in town. This one is the only one that'll let you stay the night, though, for sure. The other 2
Beautiful.
were marked as uncertain. So we're going to stay the night here. I'll let you know how it goes tomorrow. VF.